Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Sweeney. I'm a gastroenterologist at Mediclinic City Hospital, and I'll be talking to you this afternoon about the type of food that works for you. Hippocrates mentioned some 2,000 years ago that all diseases begin in the gut, and modern day research and medicine is proving this statement to be correct. The gut microbiome, which are the billions of microbes that live in our digestive tract, and the way they interact with our digestive tract, are linked with many medical problems, including obesity, cancers, heart disease, mental well-being, diabetes, our response to COVID, and our response to vaccines as well. So this central area of our digestive tract and all the microbes that live with us are a key component to our health, and what we eat and the way we treat our minds and our mind-related health has a great impact on this, and this is what we will be discussing this afternoon. So food can be glorious. We all have our favorite types of foods. We like sharing it with friends and eating by ourselves, but we have very little education on what type of food is good for us. However, we know that poor diets are the largest contributor to early deaths. So staying active and maintaining a normal BMI can add over 7 years of life. As I've said, there's little education or training on this most fundamental of needs. There's often quite conflicting and confusing messages out there, but what is consistent is that diets low in fruit, whole grains, vegetables that are high in red meats and high sugar beverages lead to more early deaths than any other factor. So poor diets can be associated with lots of health problems, including diabetes, high blood pressure, strokes, heart attacks, and particular gastrointestinal cancers, lung cancers, prostate cancers, and uterine cancer. We know if you look at epidemiology studies in the East and compare them to the West, conditions like inflammatory bowel disease, which did not exist in the East previously, are now increasing rapidly. And it's to do with adopting a Western style of life and the type of food we eat as well. Essentially, we've overprocessed our foods and overcomplicated our diets. And we're going to unpick some of these things this afternoon to try and help people make informed choices about what they put in their bodies. So before we start, let's start with the essentials. How much fluid should I drink in one day? You can go without food for several weeks, but without water, within 2 or 3 days, it can be life-threatening. So how much water should you drink in a day? Now, again, there are a lot of myths out there. People talk about having 8 glasses of water a day, but it really depends on you. It depends how old you are, what your BMI is, what your activity is. There are quite useful water intake calculators that you can put in your personal detail and work out a volume that is right for you. The key points for fluids are that not one single volume will adequately cover every person's need, because it changes with age, gender, BMI, whether you're healthy or not, physical activity, diet and climate. It is, however, important to drink fluids steadily throughout the day, particularly when you're physically active, and it's very good for your mental well-being. We know that even a low level of dehydration can make you irritable, can reduce your productivity. So it's important to drink, particularly in hot weather, particularly in the UAE, when you're out and about and when you're active as well. It's important to limit things like sugary drinks, coffee and alcohol. Let your thirst be your best mechanism, but look at your urine colour. Is your urine colour pale? Are there any rapid body changes? So for example, if you're putting on weight rapidly, sometimes it can reflect that you're taking on too much water, or if you're losing weight, that you're becoming dehydrated. So you are what you eat. Everything that your body consists of is what you've eaten. All the proteins that you've consumed, all the fats, all the fibers that are in your body are generated from the food that you've taken in. But what about diets? There's lots and lots of diets out there. Commercial diets, weight losing diets. Some diets have a very good evidence base for them, or a reasonable evidence base. The Mediterranean example has been well researched. It's a diet high in good quality proteins such as fish, olive oil, fibers and grains. And we know this is a good way to eat. We know that people in the Mediterranean live longer. There are many popular diets out there. There are the keto diet, there's intermittent fasting, there's paleo, low fat, Weight Watchers, sugar-free. But what all these diets have in common is that they put you in a calorie deficit, which means that you take less calories in than you would normally need, which results in weight loss. One of the things that people struggle with is the diet cycle. You start a diet, you restrict things, you feel deprived at times, and you're tempted to eat things that you maybe shouldn't. You have cravings, you give in, and it can affect your mental well-being, and it can create a vicious cycle sometimes. So what is your starting point? What we need to do is we need to individualize what you intake to match your needs. So the body mass index, which is a reflection of your weight versus your height, is a good thing to work out. Some people will be overweight and they want to lose weight. Others may be underweight and want to put weight on. Others may be interested in intolerances. They may have intolerance, for example, to lactose. Other patients that come and see me have allergies and they're concerned about allergies. Many patients have indigestion and heartburn. They're taking in too much tea or coffee, spicy foods, fatty foods, and we need to adjust their diet to reflect that. But most of my consultations that happen are because of irritable bowel or functional bowel disease, where people get bloated, they get uncomfortable, they may have diarrhea, constipation, and they may have relief of their symptoms when they empty their bowels. So you have to tailor the advice you give specifically to the needs of your patients. One of the interesting things about diet, food intake, and weight is your basal metabolic rate. This is the amount of energy you burn at rest. As you get older, this rate drops. Men have a higher rate because they have more muscle, and you can see on this right hand side here that different organs burn energy at different rates. So as you get older in life, you burn less energy at rest, particularly if you don't exercise and maintain your muscle. So BMR is an important indicator of how much energy you burn at rest, and it can be helpful in terms of working out what you should be eating in terms of calorie intake. So when you set a particular diet for yourself or a food goal, you have to make it specific. So for example, you have to say, what is my goal here? Am I trying to lose weight? Am I trying to gain weight? Or am I trying to maintain my weight the way it is? It has to be measurable. For example, if you've got symptoms, you might say, well, I'm going to change my diet to reduce my bloating and discomfort. It has to be attainable. So for example, if you want to lose weight, maybe set a goal of 1 kilogram per week, and it has to be relevant to you. If you're underweight, there's no point trying to starve yourself and lose weight. And also, it has to be doable. It has to be a timely thing. If you think you're going to lose large amounts of weight in a very short period of time, it may not be the best thing for your health. Many of you have probably seen a food pyramid before, and essentially what you want to do is try to reduce the type of foods at the top of the pyramid and increase the ones at the bottom of the pyramid. So things like fruit, vegetables, breads and cereals, probably increase those. Next is things like fish, poultry, and what you want to reduce are unhealthy fats, unhealthy sugars, alcohol, and not taking too much salt, which can be linked with hypertension. You may also have come across the Eat Well plate. So when you have a plate of food, what you essentially aim to do is to have half the plate containing vegetables, a quarter having a healthy source of protein, which is cooked in a healthy way rather than deep fried. You want to maybe think about baked, steamed, or putting it in an air fryer. And a quarter of it has to be starches and grains. And of course, fruit is also helpful as well. So this can be helpful when you look at what's actually on your plate to maybe increase the vegetables up, maybe increase the protein up, and maybe if you want to lose weight, reduce the starches down slightly. Often when patients come and see me, we have to go through the basics of diet. Many patients skip meals, they rush their meals, which is not healthy. So we go back to the basics, have 2 to 3 meals a day, try not to skip meals or eat late at night. Eating late at night can lead to things like bloating, heartburn, reflux. For those who feel very full and uncomfortable after meals, maybe smaller portions and eating more regularly so you still get the calories you need into your body may be a good idea. A lot of patients eat very fast. They do not focus on what they're doing. They take a lot of air down, which can result in bloating and belching. And when you then belch, you can drag acid up, which can cause burning behind the chest bone and discomfort in the throat. Chew your food very carefully and thoroughly. A lot of the digestive process should happen in the mouth. Avoid rich or spicy foods and foods that are high in fats, but these can cause acid, heartburn, and they can slow the stomach emptying so that you feel very full and uncomfortable after eating. Try to reduce processed foods, takeaways, and high sugar foods as well. This is key. Avoid unhealthy snacking. The digestive tract has to work very hard in digesting your food, and it needs rest and time to recover. This is sort of the principle behind intermittent fasting. So try to avoid unhealthy snacks. Give your gut time to rest and recover between your meals. Alcohol, don't drink above recommended levels. And for those people in particular who have heartburn, indigestion, don't take more than 2 or 3 drinks or caffeinated drinks a day. There has to be a balance between your vegetables, your fruit, your healthy fats and proteins as well. A lot of people ask me about food intolerance and food allergy, and we're going to just discuss this briefly just to give you an idea of the differences. Now, food allergies are much rarer than food intolerances. The prevalence of food allergies is thought to be about 1 to 10%. So probably about 2% of people may have a food allergy. So a well-known food allergy would be, for example, a nut allergy. This is an allergy that is mediated by an IgE reaction and can happen within seconds and minutes, sometimes up to 2 hours after you've eaten. It can be quite severe, can cause breathing problems, swelling, flushing, and often you need antihistamines and adrenaline to resolve an attack. Now, you only need small amounts of things like nuts to trigger these allergies, whereas food intolerance can, in the general population, is probably around about 5 to 15%. For those who have irritable bowel, it can be in the region of about 50%. Some studies suggest it's 75%. This food intolerance is mediated by several different types of reactions, and it often occurs much later on, somewhere between 2 hours to up to 3 days afterwards. The symptoms aren't life-threatening, but they can be distressing and can be uncomfortable. They can cause things like bloating, discomfort, change in bowel habit, and often the more you're exposed to something like, for example, lactose, if you've got lactose tolerance, the more milk you take or lactose containing milk you take, the more symptoms you tend to get. So the most common food allergies and intolerances are listed here. So for allergies, you're looking at milk, egg, peanuts, nuts, fish, shellfish, soy, and wheat. For intolerances, it tends to be more things like cabbage, beans, grains, dairy as well. So babies can tolerate lactose very well, but we think about 65% of the world's population has a degree of lactose intolerance. So as you get older, you can develop issues with lactose because your ability to digest lactose, which is provided by the lactase enzyme, seems to fall. It may be because we pick up infections along the way, which affect our ability to absorb lactose, but it may be that this is what happens as you get older in a sort of natural aging process as well. So allergies, as we've said, can be quite serious. They can cause swelling of the face, lips, difficulty breathing, severe pain, and anaphylaxis. Whereas intolerances tend to be more bloating, discomfort, sometimes headaches, nausea, sickness, and change in bowel habit, as also can cause heartburn and indigestion. So now we're going to talk about bread, gluten. Many patients that come and see me ask, Doctor, do I have an issue with eating bread? Do I have an issue with gluten? Now, there are three main issues. The first is celiac disease. The second is non-celiac gluten sensitivity and wheat allergy, which is much rarer. So we think about 1% of the population, that's 1 per every 100 person, has celiac disease, and the rate of celiac disease is increasing. For non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that means you get symptoms when you eat gluten, but you don't have celiac disease. It's in the region of 10%. For celiac disease, the symptoms can start within weeks or years of exposure to gluten. For gluten sensitivity, it happens much more quickly. If you eat bread, you can get symptoms within hours or days. And of course, with an allergy, it's much more rapid, within 2 hours, minutes to 2 hours. So the pathophysiology is different for celiac. It's an autoimmune condition. For gluten sensitivity, is immune related, immune mediated. And for wheat allergy, it's clearly an allergy. For celiac disease, we have blood tests. We can do TTG antibodies, which picks up about 90% of patients, as long as you're eating bread at the time of your blood test. We can also, if we've got a high index of suspicion, do biopsies of the small bowel as well. For gluten sensitivity, we ask patients to exclude gluten from their diet, often with the help of a dietitian, and then we reintroduce it. There's no blood test for that. And for wheat allergy, we can do skin prick testing. So if you've got an issue with bread and gluten, you're much more likely to have a gluten sensitivity than celiac disease. But if you've got concerns that you may have an issue with bread or celiac disease, then a blood test can be done by your family doctor or your gastroenterologist. Now, with celiac disease, it can cause lots of issues. Particularly in children, it can cause failure to thrive. It can cause abnormal liver function tests. You can get abdominal pain, discomfort, loose motions. You can get rashes, particularly on your arms and legs. It can cause migraine. It can cause disturbance in balance, low blood count, reproductive problems, and osteoporosis. So if you've got any of these conditions, you should have a blood test for celiac disease. What about carbohydrates? Carbohydrates always get a bad press, but there are good carbohydrates and there are not so good carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the fuel, if you like. We need carbohydrates as a source of energy. What you want to avoid are the unhealthy sugars, which cause spikes in blood sugar concentration, cause insulin spikes as well, which are linked with obesity and diabetes. Good carbohydrates, such as fruits and grains, should make up 90% of your diet. And things like sweets and chocolates should only be limited to about 10%. So avoid snacking on things like that if at all possible. One of the things we should probably touch on is resistant starches can sometimes cause bloating and discomfort. And what I often ask my patients is that when they're having foods like potatoes, pasta, and rice, is to make sure that they are fresh and warm. Once these food types cool down, even if you reheat them, they become resistant to digestion and they cause bloating and discomfort when you then eat them. So fresh is definitely best. You may have heard of the low FODMAP diet, which are the fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polygols. There are some sugars that some people cannot tolerate, and normally with a low FODMAP diet, we would refer you to a dietitian or someone who really understands the diet. So to give you an idea, so the food types in green cause less bloating and discomfort than the food types in red. So things like bananas and berries tend to be better than things like apples and pears, but this is a bit more advanced. And what we would normally do is ask patients to get the basics right, not to skip meals, not to eat unhealthily, not to have snacks. We may then try to cut out certain foods that we think may be precipitating their symptoms. So for example, lactose or fructose. And then if the symptoms persist, we may then go on to a low FODMAP diet. What about probiotics? So we often recommend for patients who've got IBS, bloating or discomfort is to take a good quality probiotic for about 4 weeks. Unfortunately, sometimes the insurance companies don't cover the probiotics, but they are commercially available as well. But after 4 weeks, if the probiotics are unhelpful, then we suggest that they be discontinued. Now, probiotics can be very good for the digestive health. They can be good for mind-related health, immunity, good for your skin as well. The ones there's lots of probiotics out there. The ones with the best evidence base are probably VSL3 and VivoMix. There are lots of natural foods that contain probiotics and are high on probiotics as well. As long as you don't have any issues with heartburn, apple cider, for example, is reasonable. Dark chocolate is a good probiotic. Pickles, for example, can be quite good as well. So this is one of the key slides. So one of the things that we've come to realize is that everything is connected. So your brain has billions of nerve connections, but so does your gut as well. And the gut and the brain are very, very closely connected. And these billions of microbes that live with us are also essential to our health. If your mood changes, these microbes change. If these microbes change, it can affect your mood. So if you change your diet, within 3 days, the microbes change and it may have an effect on your mental well-being. So if you eat healthily, you have a better microbe structure and you're more likely to enjoy better mind-related health. If you get stressed, then that also has a profound effect on your digestive tract. We've all done exams where you suddenly feel bloated and uncomfortable and you feel that you need to rush to the toilet. You haven't suddenly developed a disease. It just shows you what the sympathetic nervous system can do to your digestive tract when you get stressed. The patients of mine that do the best, they change their diets. They may try a probiotic. They do exercise, but they also look after their mind-related health as well. The body is a perfect reflection of your mind. The body will always tell you whether the mind's in a good place or not. And essentially what I noticed a few years ago were that patients of mine that talked about the past a lot were quite depressed. They had a lot of bloating discomfort and were often quite constipated. Those who thought about the future quite a lot, in an obsessive way, felt quite anxious, felt quite uncomfortable and had loose motions. Those who were more focused in the present moment enjoyed the best quality of life. So this slide is a reflection on the common advice I often give in clinic for patients. So many of my patients have issues with bloating and discomfort. Many, for example, have constipation. So there are 2 types of fiber you can have. There's soluble fiber and there's insoluble fibers. An example of soluble fiber would be oats or the insides of fruit and veg. And these will help you go to the toilet. They attract water and moisture and make your motions much softer. Another good thing that can help is linseed oil. Either you can ground linseeds down, or you can take a tablespoon to start with. Very rich in omega, very good for gut-related health, and it can also help with digestive problems, particularly constipation. So number 2, get the basics right. Don't skip meals, eat regularly, try to eat healthily, and avoid snacking. Now, brown fiber, brown bread, brown rice is normally very good for you, particularly if you've got diabetes, because it releases sugar much more slowly. Sometimes these resistant starches, when you've got IBS, can cause issues and problems, and that's when you probably need to see a gastroenterologist or a dietitian for some advice. When it comes to meats, if you're eating meats, try to avoid red meats and have more white meats. So fish, chicken, rather than beef and pork, because they tend to have high fat content, and there's an increased risk with disorders such as cancer. Drink regularly through the day. Water is best. Avoid sugary drinks. One of the other things that you may need to be careful about are artificial sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners are good in the fact that you avoid sugar, but sorbitol, which is an artificial sweetener, also present in chewing gum, can cause diarrhea if you take too much. So you have to be a little bit careful. The other sugar that you have to be careful about is fructose. Fructose, if you take a bit too much, can cause a lot of bloating and discomfort in certain patients as well. We can do breath tests for these, but the breath test can be a little bit inaccurate. So they're about 60% accurate, and often avoiding the foods and then reintroducing them to see if they trigger symptoms can be best. As we've said, fresh is best. We've messed with our foods too much. The prevalence of digestive problems is going up, particularly in the East. We've put too much processed foods in our diet. We've made it too complicated, and particularly with carbs, potatoes, pasta and rice, fresh is best. When these food types cool down, they almost become gelatin-like and resistant to digestion when you then eat them. Caffeine, tea and coffee, try to avoid excessive amounts of this. Try to stick to 2 or 3 drinks a day. As long as you don't have indigestion or heartburn, peppermint tea is quite good for bloating and discomfort, maybe 2 or 3 cups a day. So just to summarize, make sure you drink plenty of fluids. Be careful of the type of foods you take in. Try to have at least a half a plate of vegetables, a quarter of protein, a quarter of good quality carbs. Keep your carbs fresh, and the food closer to source, the better for you. The more it's messed around with, the more processing goes on, the unhealthier it is for you. Gut rest is also important as well. That's why intermittent fasting has become so popular. We know that the digestive process does put a strain on the digestive tract. There are changes, becomes leaky, and it takes time for it to recover. Have a balance. Have a balance. You can have takeaways. You can have snacks now and again, but don't do it on a regular basis. There's no such things as bad foods. It's more bad diets, really. And be careful of your mind, body, gut axis. Your mental health is very important. It affects your body, affects your digestive tract, and the kind of food you put into your gut also has an effect on your body and your mind-related health as well. There are no such thing as good or bad foods, just good and bad diets. Eating the right balance of lean proteins, fruit, vegetables, healthy fats, along with maintaining hydration, are essential to your well-being of your body and your mind. It is better to keep the consumption of processed foods, simple sugars, saturated fats, added salt, and refined sugars to a minimum. Your life can be extended by many, many quality years by eating a balanced diet that the body requires, rather than feeding the mind empty calorie snacks. Not only what, but how you eat is also very important as well. Try not to gulp your food down. Try to chew your food and make it as fine as possible before you took it down. You work so hard to put food on your plate. Why not enjoy it? And remember, fresh is always best. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions, Doc. So shall we take the questions now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Starting with the first question, Doc. What is the best way to control glucose spikes?
Yes, so that's a very good question. So the issue is what's wrong with glucose spikes. What happens is if you take in sugars, um, unhealthy sugars, what happens is that your blood sugar goes up, your insulin level goes up, and this is linked with obesity and diabetes over the long period. And what you need are food types that will release sugars more slowly. That's why we would encourage you, as long as you can tolerate them, is to have things like whole grains, breads, brown rice rather than white rice. So that's probably the best way of doing it. And avoid things like chocolate, cakes, biscuits, which are high in sugar. So have more carbs that release sugar slowly. So brown is best in that case, and avoid the white stuff, the white rice and the white breads, and of course the unhealthy snacks, the chocolate, sweets and cakes and biscuits and so forth.
Doc, what is your thought on dark chocolates? Is it a healthy, unhealthy? Because it's a personal question where, as part of the diet plan, someone is eating one bar, which is 100 grams per day of dark chocolate. What's your thought process?
So dark chocolate has more probiotic value than milk chocolate. The one time to probably avoid dark chocolate is if you've got migraines and headaches, because it's rich in tryptophan. As long as you've got migraines or headaches, and also if you keep the consumption of dark chocolate to a low amount. But I don't have an issue with dark chocolate. I think dark chocolate is probably healthier than the milk chocolate for a lot of people.
Okay. Doc, now the next question is related to celiac disease.
Yeah.
So the question goes like this: is there a way to find out if you have celiac after being gluten-free for 1 year, unable to go through gluten challenge because of the symptoms minutes after eating gluten? Even smelling gluten causes minor symptoms. Symptoms include but not limited to headaches, bloating, body aches, and fatigue. Emotional issues such as anger, depression happens during that time as well.
So that's a very good question. It's a very good question. It's something that causes a lot of issues. So often people come and see me. They say that gluten causes them a lot of problems and they've already given up gluten. So what happens in that situation is that if you do the blood tests for celiac disease, which is transglutaminase antibodies, endomyosal antibodies, the test can be negative. And what we would advise normally is to take regular gluten for about 6 weeks and then do the blood test and possibly do a biopsy of the small bowel as well, particularly if the blood tests become positive. But the issue is a lot of people just can't take the gluten. It causes them too much distress. One test that we can do is we can do a genetic test for gluten, for celiac disease, to see if they've got a particular HLA type. Now, if the HLA type is not there, you're very, very unlikely to have celiac disease. The chance of you having celiac disease is less than 1%, but unfortunately, a positive result isn't particularly helpful because many people without celiac disease have a positive HLA type for celiac disease. So we can do HLA typing in that situation. And if it's negative, chances are you haven't got celiac disease, but you may still have a sensitivity towards gluten. So there is a way around it. Ideally, you should be on the gluten, and then we do the blood test and the biopsies. But if you can't manage that, come and see me and we can do some genetic testing. If it's negative, chances are you haven't got it, but you may still have an intolerance. But if it's positive, unfortunately, it's not particularly helpful in that situation.
Going to the next question, Doc, there are a couple of questions with regards to intermittent fasting, whether it is good, bad, is there any effect, positive, negative on diabetes? Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, so I think diabetes is a special situation where you should really be looking to a dietitian or an expert in diet before you make any changes, so it doesn't affect your insulin control. With regards to diabetes, we know that if you have insulin resistance, you're overweight, you potentially can sometimes normalize your blood sugars if you hit a normal BMI. Now, the thing with intermittent fasting is often what people do is have a meal around 1 o'clock and then eat 8 o'clock and then not eat in between. So there is a reasonable evidence base for intermittent fasting, and it is to do with insulin levels and insulin spikes as well. We do know that eating does put a strain on the digestive tract. If you look under the electron microscope, there are changes, the gut becomes leaky and it needs time to repair itself. But for patients with diabetes, before you make any changes to your diet, it's best to speak to a dietitian, because no two diabetic patients are the same. There'll be different ages, they'll have different BMIs, there'll be some on oral medication, some will be on insulin, some will be on both. So in that situation, before you make any changes, please come and see us, talk to us, so we can help you and advise you and personalize the advice to you.
Noted, Doc. Doc, with respect to, again, the question is related to intermittent fasting. What's the ideal way of doing? Do all days should have the same window period of eating? Can we do like 12 p.m. to 8 p.m.? Because largely the working people, they in office, they don't have time. So can they skip the lunch 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. and they have dinner? Or it can be like next day 2 p.m. to 10 a.m. How does it work for intermittent?
Yeah, so basically what often people do is give the gut a rest for 16 hours and then eat over roughly an 8-hour window. So you might, for example, have skip breakfast. You're allowed fluids, of course, so you're allowed to have drinks, black coffee, that kind of thing, in the morning, and then maybe you have your first meal around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and your last meal around about 8 o'clock, and then you tend not to eat between 8 and midday the following day, as long as you don't have any other health issues or any other medical problems that would cause or intermittent fasting may aggravate. That's the way people do it. So it's really the window, the 16 hours, and it's up to you whether you eat a bit earlier in the day, maybe have a meal at 10 o'clock and then maybe have your evening meal at 6 o'clock. So it's to keep that window of 16 hours. That's how the intermittent fasting works.
Now,
The window. Yeah. So was that a question? It's gone quiet. I can't hear anything. Is there a question? Sorry, I think we've got a bit of technical issue with the volume. Yeah.
So I'll be reading the questions for you, doctor.
Okay.
What is the best way to control glucose spikes?
We've had that question.
You can answer the question.
I think we've done that one already.
Okay. Is dark
We've
chocolate?
done that one. I think it's further down.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question here about lactose intolerance, and this is again a very good question. So with lactose intolerance, it tends to develop as we get older. So infants can tolerate lactose very well. They have high levels of lactase, and what happens is maybe because we pick up infections or GI issues as we get older, our ability to process lactose becomes severely impaired. And what happens is that some people can take a certain amount of milk in their diets, but unfortunately, if they go over a certain amount, they start to get bloating and discomfort. So they can take lactose-free milk. They can use substitutes such as a soya milk or coconut milk. As long as you're not depriving yourself of protein, this would be a perfectly reasonable approach. We can do lactose breath test, but often they're only accurate in about 60% of the time. So they're not the best test, and we often advise people to avoid lactose and maybe reintroduce it to see if they get symptoms. Just see what the next question is. Control what kind of foods we should make. Yeah, so it says how to control what kind of food we should take while working from home. So this is a very good question. A lot of people are out and about working, and often it restricts what they can eat. And what you have to do is you have to be prepared, maybe take food from home. So for example, some of my patients, what they do is they, for example, get a soup maker. They use a thermos flask to keep their soup warm so that the carbs do not cool down. And that's key, because once they cool down, the molecules realign. They become much more resistant to digestion. So maybe kind of thermos flask or taking food from home out is a better strategy for you, rather than getting caught short and buying something that ultimately you're going to end up paying the price for in the bathroom later on that evening. Some tips to reduce blood pressure. That's a very good question, because we know that high blood pressure can lead to heart disease, can lead to strokes, can lead to renal impairment. There are a few key points. First of all, look at your salt intake. The World Health Organization are looking at how much salt we take in. So try to reduce the amount of salt you're taking in. There are salt substitutes out there as well, which are much healthier. Stress can also put your blood pressure up. So things like exercising, yoga, tai chi, mindfulness can be very helpful. In fact, a lot of my patients, I prescribe a mindfulness program too. It doesn't cost very much money at all. And over 6 to 8 weeks, they do a program at home, maybe 10-15 minutes in the day, 10-15 minutes in the evening. And what research has shown, within 3 or 4 weeks, your brain changes, the good genes switch on, your stress levels fall, you become more productive, and your sleep improves, and your cardiovascular risk factors drop as well. So your blood pressure drops, your heart rate drops as well. So, and also in addition, taking a good quality probiotic can also potentially be helpful as well, because we now know that the gut is key to a lot of cardiovascular risk factors. It's been linked to heart disease, been linked to strokes, linked to blood pressure, and we know that putting good quality food in your body, having a good microbiome, and having living more in the moment is very good for your blood pressure and your general health. So the next question is, what do you think of non-calorie sugars such as sweeteners? So non-calorie sugars can be very good, particularly if they reduce the amount of unhealthy sugar you take. The issue sometimes with sweeteners is, in some patients, particularly because of the sorbitol, so in chewing gum, in soda, some people, it can cause diarrhea. So you have to be a little bit careful. The other one you have to be careful on with is fructose. Fructose in some people can cause a lot of bloating, a lot of discomfort. It can put your amylase level up, which is linked to your pancreas. It can cause loose motions as well. So as long as you're not getting side effects from these things, I don't have an issue. Next question, let's see what that is. Oh, hello, that's yeah. So next question is whether there's good foods and bad foods, and whether it's good diets or not such good diets. I suppose, strictly speaking, bad foods would be things like undercooked meats and stuff that give you things like Campylobacter, Salmonella, E. coli. We'd all agree that was bad. Now, the issue is if you have a cheat day a week and you have a bit of chocolate or a cake, that's not a problem. The issue is if you have these unhealthy things on a regular basis, and that's what we mean about diet. So there's no such thing as bad foods as long as you have them in moderation and they're not causing you any side effects or ill effects. So I don't have an issue with my patients having the odd little treat here and there. The problem is that's not the problem with patients. The thing is we eat unhealthily most of the time. If you get stressed, if you get anxious, your body or your mind thinks it's going to be under attack and your body stocks up on sugar. Okay, let's go down a bit. Any more questions? Yeah, I think that's the same question, sorry. Let's go up. Something a bit there. So one of the key things patients come and see me about sometimes is bloating and discomfort. We've already talked about keeping your carbs fresh. The other things that often cause bloating and discomfort in patients are things like garlic and onions. And it's not the bulbs that cause, it's not the oils that cause the issue, it's the bulbs that cause the problem. So if you have an issue with garlic, what you can do is you can put the garlic in your frying pan, get the flavour out and remove the bulbs, or use garlic oil. Often patients have issues with common onions, which are the round onions, and spring onions can be much better. Take the white bit off and the leafy bit off and just cut the stem. So that can be one way around there as well. Any more questions? If I missed anything. Someone's asking about water, how much water we should consume. Now, there's this fallacy about 8 glasses of water a day. I spent a long time researching diets and fluid intake, and I went looking for the evidence base for this 8 glasses of water a day. And it was basically in a government document some 60 years ago that someone mentioned 8 glasses, and there's no evidence base for it because it varies from person to person. You know, if you are ill, if you've got a temperature, you're going to need more water. If you live in a hot environment like Dubai, you're going to need more water. The best thing to do is to go online and use a water daily calculator for you. You can put in your age, you can put in your BMI, your exercise level, and it'll give you a much more personalized amount. But the other way to do it is to keep an eye on your weight, the color of your urine, make sure it's nice and pale, and drink regularly. Try not to let the thirst kick in, particularly in places like UAE, where you become dehydrated very quickly. So try to drink regularly throughout the day, but keep an eye on your weight, keep an eye on the color of your urine, and definitely, if you feel thirsty, is to take fluids. Water is best, of course. Sparkling water is carbonated and cause bloating and discomfort. Yeah, someone's asking, is intermittent fasting a good strategy for weight loss? It depends on what you do in the 8 hours when you are allowed to eat. So obviously, as long as you don't go crazy and eat lots of unhealthy food. So one of the things we saw, particularly in Ramadan in the gastro clinic, was that patients would obviously fast for long periods, and their evening meal, they would have lots of high sugar, high fat, unhealthy snacks sometimes, and that would cause a lot of problems, a lot of strain on the body as well. So as long as you're sensible in that 8-hour window and don't overeat unhealthy processed foods which are high in sugar and high in fat, intermittent fasting is a good way of losing weight. But the key really is, if you want to lose weight, is to increase your protein levels up, eat good whole grains, eat fruit, eat vegetables, and reduce the snacking, reduce the fats. That is a perfectly reasonable way of doing it as well. A lot of people do intermittent fasting because it makes them feel more energetic. They feel like they have more energy. So that question, yeah. Yeah. So this is a good question. It's about probiotics. So there's two different types of things you can take. You can take prebiotics, which your bowel changes to a probiotic, or you can take probiotics. Now, nice guidelines suggest that if you take probiotics for 1 month and you feel better, then you can carry them on long term. The only time you have to be a bit careful with probiotics if you're immunocompromised, if your immune system is weak. That's the only time maybe you need to seek expert advice. But there's no issue taking probiotics long term. And as I said, the ones that probably there's lots of probiotics out there. The ones that have been researched the most are VSL3 and Vivomix are the ones that have the best evidence base for them. And we use probiotics for certain disorders like pouchitis, when you've had your bowel removed and you've got the lower part of your rectum left. We're also now looking at the microbiome. So for example, Clostridium difficile, which is an infection of your bowel, if this keeps coming back, we do fecal transplants where we use healthy donors to re-establish the microbiome. And there's growing evidence and a growing interest in how to manipulate the microbiome by giving more healthy bacteria, by using fecal transplants in inflammatory bowel disease and irritable bowel. And one day we will understand the microbiome much better, and we'll realize how closely the disorders of the microbiome are linked to the diseases that we're getting, particularly in the West. So keep an eye on this spot. We're looking at which bugs are healthy, how to get them into the digestive tract. Yeah, so this is a very good question. It's about exercise and controlling cholesterol. Now, the thing with exercise, it's important to do it on a regular basis. Now, you don't have to go crazy. What I often advise my patients is to, for example, if they're on the treadmill, is to set the incline up to 8 to 10, what's comfortable for them, set the speed to about 5 kilometers per hour and do what they can, 15 to 20 minutes. So to walk on a regular basis is a perfectly good exercise. And we know that regular exercise is linked with longevity. You live longer, your cholesterol level can fall, your blood pressure can fall as well, and you're at lower risk of heart disease and stroke as well. So it's a perfectly reasonable exercise, walking. Do as much as you can, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. As I said, put the incline of the treadmill up, set it at 5 kilometers, try not to hold on to the rails, and it's a perfectly good way to exercise without putting strain on your body. Swimming, if you can swim, is very good as well. What you don't want to do is knacker your joints out by overdoing it. Yeah. So Someone's asking here about fecal transplantation and IBS. This is a growing area of interest. So we know there's very good evidence for Clostridium difficile for fecal transplantation. This has been shown a very long time ago. The initial studies for IBS were mixed. One showed a positive result and the subsequent one showed a negative result. But this is now an increasing area of interest. And we think that the problem is we don't even know what a lot of the microbes that are in our digestive tract are. But as our understanding of these microbes grow, we will find new and novel ways of manipulating the digestive tract. But eating healthily, exercising, looking after your mind-related health is going to be key to that, because that's where we end up with problems in the first place. But yes, I think fecal transplant in the future will be a growing area, particularly when we are able to home in on what good bacteria that we need to replace in the digestive tract. Very good question. So someone's asking about dopamine release and what foods can help. So dark chocolate, for example, would be a good example of that. You know, rich in dopamine can be helpful as well. Things like broccoli can be very good, particularly the leafy green vegetables. So there's a question here about food intolerance. So there are certain things that we can check for. We can check for lactose intolerance, we can check for fructose intolerance, but the tests are only about 60% accurate. To see if you've got intolerance is to remove that food type from your diet, see if your symptoms resolve, and then reintroduce it. Now, this is different from an allergy. If you've got a peanut allergy, what you don't want to do is to reintroduce it back, because if you've got a sensitivity, you may end up with a severe reaction. And this is where you need a dietitian to help and support you. Food intolerances are very common. We reckon about 10% of the general population have them. In the IBS group, it's probably in the region of 50 to 75%, but you probably need some help and support. The common things tend to be things like lactose, gluten, but you don't want to be cutting gluten out without some expert help. So you don't want to end up creating yourself a deficiency in the amount of protein and fiber you're taking. Someone's asking, what would you say about power enzyme complex probiotics? So what I would say, there's lots of things out there on the market, lots of enzymes out there that can help you potentially digest food. So for example, if you've got lactose intolerance, you can take lactase. The best thing to do is probably just avoid it. And there's lots of probiotics. You go to a pharmacy or alternative shop, there's rows and rows of probiotics and prebiotics out there. The ones that have been studied, as I said before, are the ones that have the most evidence base is Vivomix and VSL3. And if you're going to go for a probiotic, then this is a good one. Also, certain foods, as we discussed in the lecture, in the talk, are very high. Natural foods are very high in probiotics as well. So you can get probiotics from good quality foods, things like berries and so forth. So there's lots of ways to get good quality food into your system. Yogurts, for example, if you haven't got lactose intolerance, you go lactose free, I suppose, can also be a good source of probiotics as well. Yeah, so this is a very good question. It's saying that if you've got excess gas, what's the best medicine to relieve this? First of all, what we need to figure out is why you're getting the gas in the first place. So there's two ways gas gets into your digestive tract. You put it there in the first place by swallowing lots of air, so you're eating too quickly, or you're taking fizzy drinks, carbonated drinks. So avoid those things. The second thing is, what can happen is the billions of microbes that live in your large bowel can turns certain food types, such as garlic or resistant starches, into wind. So you may need to do a bit of work with your specialist on what exactly is triggering your wind. But there's lots of things out there that can be helpful. We sometimes prescribe Windies, Metazone, Buscopan. But one of the natural remedies, as long as you don't get heartburn, is peppermint tea. Peppermint has a good or relatively good evidence base for bloating and discomfort. So maybe switch your tea and coffee to a nice peppermint drink instead. Did that one. Ready? Yeah, so this is a good question. What kind of high fiber foods should be included in your diet? So one of the there's lots of diets out there. The ones that have, you know, a good evidence base are, for example, the Mediterranean diet. And what you, as long as you don't have an issue with the resistant starches, things like brown bread, brown rice, pulses, whole grain tend to be a very, very good source of fiber. If you haven't got a nut allergy, nuts can also be very good. White meats, of course, are a very good source of protein as well, which would accompany the Mediterranean diet. I think we answered that one. This is a very good question. It's made me smile, actually. It's the question is, should we eat fruit before a meal? Now, what we know is that food layers in the stomach, depending on what food you're eating. So, and we know that certain foods take longer to digest. So, for example, it's easier to digest things like fruit and vegetables. Dairy comes next, and then obviously meats take a lot longer. And what some people advocate is maybe having your fruits first, then your vegetables, then maybe dairy, and having protein at the end. The stomach does have a natural layering process that does occur in the stomach, but the most important thing is to have fruit in the first place. A lot of people don't eat fruit, so to have some in your diet, whether you have it at the beginning or the end, is the most important thing. But there is some physiological basis to having the fruit first, so having your snack, I suppose, or your dessert first. But very good question. Yeah, so someone's asking, is it bad to exercise right after a meal? What I would say is you probably need to, if you're going to do a strenuous exercise routine, you probably need to power up your exercise routine. So maybe have something to eat an hour before, maybe some like brown pasta or something that will release carbs slowly. If you want to build muscle, try to have a protein meal half an hour after exercising, but try not to exercise within an hour of eating, because what happens is you get a lot of blood diverted to the GI tract. That is important in terms of helping the digestive process. And when you then start exercising, you might feel lightheaded, you might get abdominal discomfort and cramps. So try not to exercise or run within an hour after eating. So this is a very good question. How to control acid reflux? Acid reflux is very common, and there are certain foods that will aggravate it. So avoid anything acidic. Avoid citrus fruits like oranges and lemons. Spicy foods can also aggravate GORD. Now, if you love your spicy food, I've got a little tip for you. What you can do is roll your chilies, cut them up, take the seeds out, and just use the skins for the heat. It's the seeds that cause the problem. Of course, be careful to wash your hands as well. Tea and coffee, not more than 3 cups. One of the worst things for GERD is smoking. Smoking acid that's produced, but it relaxes the lower esophageal sphincter, so acid can work its way up much more easily as well. Avoid fatty foods, because fat slows the stomach emptying. Things sit in your stomach for a lot longer. Some people have issues with watermelon. Cabbage can also cause an issue as well. Try not to eat quickly. Try not to eat quickly. If you eat quickly, you take a lot of air down, you get a lot of belching and discomfort afterwards. Also, if you got reflux, avoid peppermint as well. Stress can make acid worse. The body thinks it's under attack, so it produces more acid and become more sensitive to acid as well. White meats better than red meats as well. But sometimes you do all these things and you still have issues. Avoid tight-fitting clothes, which puts pressure on the tummy. Sometimes lifting the top head of your bed can also be helpful as well, trying to keep the acid down. A little bit impractical for some people. And try not to eat late at night. Try not to eat, if possible, 3 hours before you go to bed. Yeah, so it's a question on probiotics. So what I've done in the talk is have a set of natural foods. The talk will be available to people afterwards, won't it? Which are there, so you can have a look at which probiotics naturally can be very helpful. Yeah, so chicken is considered a white meat. So chicken, turkey are good sources. The breast is probably got less fat in than the leg, but also it's the way you cook it. You know, if you're having chicken and you've got it with breadcrumbs on and you put it in a deep fat fryer, it's not the best way. So maybe an air fryer or baking is good, or steaming is good as well. So it's not only the fact that you've got chicken there, it's how you cook it. Because if you put chicken in oil, it sucks the oil up and makes it unhealthy. So white meat, chicken, turkey, not a problem. Make sure they're cooked well. Having a meat thermometer can be helpful, because I see so many cases of Campylobacter salmonella in my clinic. I wouldn't want anyone to get food poisoning. So cook the chicken well. Go for the breast if you're really worried about excess fat, and make sure it's cooked in a healthy fashion. So yes, it is a white meat. Yeah, so someone's asking about diet sodas versus normal drinks. Now, artificial sweeteners have been studied a lot in studies, and there's nothing to say they are bad in any way, but there are certain patients, when they take things like sorbitol or fructose, they will get bloating, discomfort, and diarrhea. And if you're one of them, then you may be having an issue. So yes, it's better to have artificial sweeteners rather than high sugar drinks, but water is best. Water is a good drink, but if you want a bit of sweetener, that's okay. But if you overdo it, it can cause diarrhea. Yeah, so we talked about the two types of fiber. Someone's asking, is psyllium healthy to have on a regular basis? Psyllium is a fiber that you can add to your food. It's a soluble fiber and it can help you go to the toilet. And if it's helpful, it's perfectly safe to have long-term and on a regular basis. And often as doctors, we prescribe it.
And that concludes the session. So thank you all for asking these questions to Dr. Sweeney. And you have any further questions, you can always visit Dr. Sweeney at Mayo Clinic City Hospital, North Wing. He sits here and he's happy to see you in his clinic. Thank you all for attending this session today.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Good luck with your diets.